Hey, everybody, what's up? It's your boy MJ. Welcome to the Black Wine Guy Experience. My guest today is the only American to have won every major wine award and given in the English language, Karen MacNeil. Her awards include the James Beard Award for Wine and Spirits Professional of the Year, the Louis Roederer Award for Best Consumer Wine Writing, and the International Wine and Spirits Award as the Global Wine Communicator of the Year. She is the former wine correspondent for the Today Show on NBC. And Karen is a highly sought-after speaker and consultant. In 2019, the Lux Life Awards named Karen MacNeil and Company the best dynamic wine consultancy in the United States. And lastly, she has recently released the third edition of her award-winning book, The Wine Bible. Welcome, Karen.
Thanks, MJ.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming in today. I know I've been going back and forth with your people, your team, and you just released the book, so you're out on a book tour, I take it.
I am. I was right before being here in New York. I was in Singapore. Big, lots of interest in wine in Asia these days.
Yeah. So you've had this storied career, and it's still going, and you're in the midst of it actually. No signs of slowing down. But let's start at the beginning. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Boston, and then my family lived in outside of Reno, Nevada for some years as I was a kind of preteen. And then most of my adult life was spent in New York here before moving to Napa Valley a few years ago.
Okay, so born in Boston and then Reno. What did your parents do that took you from Boston to Reno?
I know. Well, it was not a good family, really. It was a poor Irish Catholic family, and I think they were probably in the files of some police stations in various places. But
okay.
Yeah, so I think they were escaping.
Yeah.
Who knows what? I was too young to know
Right.
what. But I actually ran away from home at 14 and a half and never went back.
Oh, wow. Where did you run away to?
Well, you cannot, supposedly, you're not supposed to run away at 14 and a half, right?
Right.
And I, as I said, it was a pretty bad family.
Yeah.
I was terrified because I thought that I would be put into a foster home, and
wow.
it's just by sheer luck in a way that I wasn't. But actually, I opened the phone book, looked under lawyers, looked at called the first law firm listed under A in the yellow pages, got myself a pro bono lawyer, and I didn't even know the word pro bono, of course, but eventually was able to convince the judge in my case to let me live on my own because I was a really good kid in school, and I had straight A's. I was the valedictorian of the junior high school and then high school. And the judge sort of gave me a parole person who would check in with me once every few months. Otherwise, I just had to prove to him that I could get straight A's and support myself. So I did, starting at 14 and a half.
That is incredible. My wife is a former social worker. She'll be blown away by that story. But I could tell from what she shared with me, it's very. He or she actually used judgment because you could have got put in a bad foster care is gnarly, and they could have, so good for you, kudos for you. Wow, that's amazing. So you were the valedictorian, so where did you go to college, university?
Well, when you're a kid like that, it was pretty interesting because by the time I was maybe 17, and most kids are thinking about college. One of my teachers said to me, "So where do you want to go? Where do you want to go to college?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not going to college." He said, "Why not?" And I said, because people like me don't go to college. And he said, you're kidding. Come on. You're the damn valedictorian, right? You can go to college. I said, because I was the first person who graduated from high school in my family. There was no talk of college ever. There were no books, no music in my house. And it was not an intellectual environment, let's say. But anyway, this teacher said to me, okay, will you do something for me? I really liked this teacher. So he paid for me to take CLEP advanced placement tests, which I took, and I got a full scholarship. So he said, so now like you're going to go to college, right? I said, oh, okay. So I started at the University of Nevada at Reno, but then through a circuitous route, I left, decided I really wanted to go to New York, drove across country, and managed to, I arrived in New York on Thanksgiving Day in 1979 with $6, knowing no one. Thank God I could talk my way in, not myself, but talk my way into the YMCA to stay, YWCA, for a night. By the next day I had 3 jobs because I was really good at getting jobs at this point. I mean, they were menial work, but still. And once I got myself kind of back established, I went back to school in New York and graduated from Pace.
Oh, wow. How old were you when you drove across country? Just curious.
I must have been about 18 because I got to New York when I was either 18 or 19.
I mean, it's just fascinating. You ran away from home, convinced the judge to not put you in foster care, get a scholarship. And then, I mean, there's something when we're doing our warm-up, you're talking about what it takes for certain people to persevere. And there's something inside of you that's, I'm sure those people would love to have a conversation with you once you've shared your stories, because there's some resilience there that, wow.
Well, it connects to wine because, when you ask people what's the first wine they had or the first wine that inspired you, when did you start drinking wine? I don't always tell the story, but for me, it was when I was 15 because I was living on my own. Nobody told me I couldn't. I would go to this one checker. I knew her schedule perfectly. I was never carded because I looked kind of like a serious kid, and looked very straight-laced. And I never drank too much, but every night when I was 15, I would have a glass of wine while I was doing my homework. And, mind you, it was like 89-cent Bulgarian red, right?
Yeah.
Every now and then on a special occasion, $1 a bottle, leave for Milch. But still, I mean, by the time I moved to New York and tried to become a wine writer, I had been drinking wine for 4 years by then.
I love this. The story gets better and better. What a 15-year-old drinks one glass? I mean, and it's kind of like it was like the coming attraction in your life. Like you have a glass of wine and you're doing your work. I'm sure sometimes you have a glass of wine and you're writing and you're just in your zone.
But I certainly didn't know it then. And when I moved to New York with the idea of being a writer was a complete. It was crazy. I mean, only. In some ways, I was a pretty wise kid, but this made no sense at all. I'd never taken a writing class. I didn't have a degree in journalism. When I arrived, I lived for a couple of years. I was on food stamps because I was really poor, even though I had some menial jobs. And I lived in a 5th floor walk-up in what was then called Hell's Kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
On the border of now more fashionable Chelsea.
Right.
But, it was a pretty bad part of New York. And so I worked in the morning and in the afternoon. At night, I apprenticed myself for free to literary agents. And then in the late night, I would write articles, hoping to get published. In those days, you wrote an article, mailed it in, and I collected 324 rejection slips, which I thumbtacked to the wall of my apartment and looked at them every day. I wish I had them now. Actually, it's somewhere along the line I must have thrown those out. But my first article that sold was, of all things, because we were just talking about butter. My first article was on butter, and it sold to the Village Voice.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's like, I don't pre the question, but I was going to say, what do you major in? I wasn't journalism, obviously, but I love the fact that you said, I'm going to be a wine writer. And my next one, well, let's talk about butter.
Yeah, because, in those days in New York, there were all these great old Jewish delis that used to buy huge blocks of butter. I'm talking like 2 feet by 2 feet blocks. And you would go into these delis, and a guy in, this big white jacket would take out what looked like a machete and just like carve you off a big chunk of butter, which was white, not yellow, by the way, because they put no dye in it. And so I don't know. I took it upon myself to try all these butters from all these Jewish delis, and sent this piece in to the Village Voice. And for whatever reason, they thought it was funny and they liked it. I got paid $30, the best $30 ever. Immediately went out to the hip nightclub in New York, Max's Kansas City at that time. Sat at the bar, ordered a bottle of champagne, and drank the whole thing. You'll be surprised to know that food stamps will not pay for champagne sitting at a nightclub bar. So, so I had to have cash money for that. So that was my first article. It's a long time though between butter and wine.
Okay.
in publishing and for me to get published in wine.
I got people listening all around the world. Tell people about the Village Voice, which is now defunct, but it was an iconic. Tell people a little bit about the Village Voice.
Yeah, the Village Voice in sort of predating me in the 50s and 60s and 70s was a kind of leftist newspaper, very thick. Lots of people in the jazz world read it. They always had incredible reviews of everything happening in New York. It was, in a sense, a cross between a mainstream and a counterculture newspaper. And it had a huge circulation. It was the paper that anyone who was in the arts certainly read in New York.
Yeah, and even I used to pick it up. It was like it had all, like I said, it had all the underground bars, the shows who was coming to town. It's exactly what you said it was, and after $30, I guess that's a lot of money back then for it, right? Like people don't get because we have crazy inflation now as we record this, but it was enough that you could buy people. I'm somebody like, she got champagne for $30, and you probably didn't have to spend the whole $30 on the bottle even.
Yeah, no, writers are not paid very much. It's surprising to me that even today I'm sort of paid when I do articles about the same amount of money that I made in the late 80s and 90s. It's kind of a sad story about wine journalism.
Yeah, there was an online magazine. Well, it was a combination between a magazine and a direct to consumer that just went under. And but even I know people were writing for those, and everybody has several gigs. It's kind of like podcasting too. Like you have to have some other gigs unless you have 10 million downloads. So you said it was a long time between butter and wine. You were at some point commissioned to write an article for Elle. Was that the first foray into wine writing, or no?
I don't think the first one was Elle, but
well, tell us about the first one.
Yeah, in those days too, we're talking about like the late 70s. The 70s and 80s were this great heyday of magazines. Gentleman's Quarterly and Elle and Mirabelle. I mean, there were just Town and Country, so many vibrant magazines. And all of the wine writing at that time in the whole country was controlled by about 5 or 6 men here in New York. And they wrote for everybody, including those magazines that you would have logically thought would have a woman writer,
Right.
like Vogue or even Good Housekeeping. No, one of these 5 guys wrote for it.
It's like a syndicate.
Yes, it was. So, and there was no, at that point, by that point, I was a pretty well-established food writer. I was writing for the New York Times, for example, on food. But what I really wanted to write about was wine. But there was no breaking in because there were no wine schools in New York. Retailers couldn't taste you on wine. Retailers didn't have classes. There were no wine events. And even though I had been pretty well published in food by that point, I was still pretty poor. And I didn't have enough money to buy great wine. And I didn't have parents who showered me with the beauties in their cellar or
Right.
whatever. So anyway, one of these 5 guys was a friend of mine, and he knew how much I wanted to learn about wine. And meanwhile, every week, the producers from around the world would fly in just to taste these guys on wine. It would be the Chianti Classico producers on Monday and the port producers on Wednesday. It was unbelievable. So anyway, he asked the other guys if I could taste with them, and the answer was yes, on one condition: that I not talk.
What?
Yep.
See,
So I didn't talk for about 6 years, and
for 6 years. I was waiting for 6 months.
tasted with them every week. And MJ, I didn't want to talk to give my opinion.
Yeah.
As far as I was concerned, I didn't have an opinion yet. I didn't know enough to have a valid opinion, so I didn't want to chat and have an opinion. I wanted to ask them questions. And like, why is red wine red, right? All of the very basic questions that are usually more complex than you think. So the story, though, has a happy ending in a way, because all those years later, when I eventually wrote the Wine Bible, I remembered so clearly all the questions I had, all the questions that were confusing, all the issues of, wait a minute, why is A true and C true, but B is not true, right? Because wine is often illogical, or you need someone to kind of explain it to you. And so I, in a sense, credit the success of the Wine Bible with having to have been quiet for all those 6 years.
Well, there's there's so much in that, right? I'm sure you know Eric Asimov. He told a summer story. He was writing for food because they had a wine writer. Like, it was hard even for him. Like, he had to inherit that. So I'm sure that guy who was his wine writer was probably one of those 5 guys, right? Like, yeah. And but yeah, when you said it, I was like, so I think wine is becoming more open, but it's just tough to break into. I think people need to understand it. And your perseverance. I mean, so here, and like I said, we had Mary Young Mulligan on. She was like the first American or second North American to be master wine. Because this became a big issue. This is a big issue right now about diversity and inclusion. So what have you seen over your career? And I would just say, I want to say this to everybody, listen, and I don't think people understand how much you did by being able to sit in that room quiet for 6 years. like an unsung hero of the wine suffrage movement.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's better, right? It's a lot better now. You yourself having this podcast is evidence that it's better now. Me sitting here is evidence that it's better now. But it's still really hard to break in. The one thing that people have today that we didn't have a couple of decades ago is social media. I mean, look at some of the really hip bloggers and social media influencers. I mean, I think for Black women, for example, it's been great to be able to have your own voice and start creating your own content.
Yeah. I mean, that is true. I mean, you can choose yourself nowadays.
Yeah.
You don't have to be chosen. So that is very true. And that's just incredible. So let's get to L. What was that, like your big break? Would you say that was that kind of like your big break, or how would you describe that for you?
Let me think. I think the first piece was either in L or Mirabella, and it, one of the things that happened soon after that is I began to have editors call me and ask me if I would write about wine for them. It was both wonderful on the one hand, but it was terrible on the other because there were still a limited number of outlets. And I knew that if, New York Magazine called me, that meant that they were going around Alex Bespaloff, who was one of these guys, the late, wonderful Alex Bespaloff. And so I was like, man, you can't step in on someone else's turf, right? Mm-hmm. But the number of turfs were very limited. So I made a bit of a reputation, I think, for myself as writing really a little bit offbeat kinds of pieces that these guys wouldn't have thought to write in the very beginning. And again, it was a way of kind of sneaking into the industry from, kind of an end run in.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the title of that article?
Gosh, I don't. I should. I don't.
So when did you start? Did you ever... I know you've published articles just about every place, but did you ever have a kind of like a writing residency at a publication for a while, anything like that?
When I began writing a lot for magazines and newspapers, I would often have 6 or 7 articles going at the same time. Because, rent's in New York, right? You couldn't be writing one article and make your rent, for sure. And some of them, for quite a while, some of those pieces would be on food as well as wine. And so one day I had written a piece on, of all things, sandwiches, and especially New England sandwiches like lobster rolls, for the New York Times Magazine. So I'm sitting in my apartment on Monday, and I get a call, and the person says, "Hello, this is Peter Workman." And of course, I nearly fell off my chair because Peter Workman was a legend in the publishing industry. He was the head of Workman Publishing. He was considered one of the most brilliant marketing guys in publishing. And so I knew of him, but I certainly didn't know him. And he said, "So you want to have lunch in a couple of hours?" And I said, "Okay." So anyway, I go off to lunch with him, and he says, "So I read your piece yesterday in the New York Times. I really like the way you write. What book have you always wanted to write?" And I thought, can this be possibly happening to me? This is like sitting on a stool in Hollywood in the old days, and Steven Spielberg decides to cast you as the lead in some movie, even though you're completely unknown. So I said, I've actually written a book, and I had written a food book published by Random House. And I said, it was not a good experience, and I don't want to write a book. And he said, "That is the wrong answer. Think again." So I said, "Okay, you're right. It is the wrong answer. Okay, I do want to write a book, but I want it to be on wine." And he said, "Well, we've never published a book on wine, but okay, can you have it ready in a year?" I said, "Absolutely." And 10 years later, out came the first wine Bible.
So it took 10 times as long.
And every year he would call me up and he would say, "Okay, just promise me that you are working on it, that you're not like hanging around in your pajamas or something. And I would say, Peter, I promise you I'm working on it, but my line was, it's bigger than we thought. So when I brought the manuscript to him, here you are carrying this 5,000-page manuscript. And I sat in his office, and of course I was terrified. What if, after 10 years of essentially unpaid work, mind you, right? What if he didn't like it? Like, oh no. So I was quiet, and I watch him, leafing through it, reading parts. So he looks up at me and he says, "It's brilliant, and we're going to call it the Wine Bible." And I said, "Absolutely not." I get the wrong answer every time here.
Yeah.
And he said, "So apparently you, my dear, did not read your contract very carefully because, and did you know this? A book's title is considered part of the book's marketing. You as an author don't have a say in a book's title." And he said to me, "Listen, for the last 10 years, I trusted you when you told me that everything between the covers, right?" He said, I don't question any of it. I trusted you, and now you have to trust me.
Mm. Well, there you go, you aspiring writer. Writing a book just makes you check your contract.
Exactly.
What is it like? What is involved in a 10-year process? What was your process for writing the book? Obviously, there's a lot of research, but it is called the Wine Bible, which is basically saying that's it. It's a quintessential treatise, if you will.
Yeah.
You got the treatise on Jesus. You got a treatise on wine, and they actually interact. So
They do.
And Jesus' treatise. Like, where did you start? Where did you begin? So you had the meeting. He said, write the book.
Well, that's the first and in some ways the hardest thing to figure out. Like, you go home and now you're like, and now what, right? Because, it's this huge elephant. Where do you start? How do you start?
You start by cleaning your apartment because you don't know what to do. So
Yes,
you just start
exactly.
doing every other thing.
That's right. Yeah, clean those closets. Get everything organized. That's right. And Workman, I must say, was no help, because I would call up my editor and I would say, "So, I'm thinking about this, but I'm running into this problem. Like, what should I do?" And she would say, "It's your book. Do whatever you want," and hang up. Anyway, the other thing which you'll really know, and of course all your listeners too who love wine, is figuring out the relative weights of things was really important. Like, if you do 4 pages on Brunello di Montalcino, one region in Tuscany, what should New York State get, right?
Back then, probably
Yeah, because how much space you give is to a topic is you're kind of, you're making a judgment right there. So lucky, but I made sort of 2 promises to myself that I really kept the whole time. One is not to read anybody else, because when you're writing, this was the whole, Bob Parker had become a phenomenon by then, and the critic Bob Parker. And people would say, "Wow, did you read what Robert Parker said about X?" And I'd be like, "No, I wasn't reading anybody. I was, because I wanted my reactions about wine to be truly my own. I didn't want anybody else even subliminally in my head." And the other thing that I promised myself was not to be internally referential, by which I mean, when I was starting out, people, I think really meanly would say something like, whatever, you'd be tasting some red wine, and they would say, "Oh, reminds me of the 61 Margaux. Don't you think?"
And you said,
And
you
I-
want him like, MF, I another had a 61 Margaux.
Exactly. I would be like, "Oh, come on, you asshole." That's
Exactly.
Really, like, how, for a fact that I have never had a 1961 Margaux. It was a way of, but you remember, wine used to be especially in Britain, it was class, right? It was
Right.
a way of keeping certain people out.
Right. Right.
And so I have never said wine X is like wine Y. If I can't describe wine X in using words that everybody understands, then I'm in trouble. I shouldn't be in the business.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, this comes up a lot. I mean, wine is a wealth product. It's a luxury product. It's changing, but yeah, I mean, you know, you've been to a lot of tastings. I'm fortunate. I get to taste a lot of good stuff like you do. But like I think I started because I have so much reverence for wine. It needs a little bit more irreverence still. You know, it needs a kick in the ass. It is just fermented grapes at the end of the day. I mean, it's glorious, but like I think it can be used as a weapon. But I mean, I love what you shared about giving weight to stuff. But like I couldn't. Did you go visit wine regions while you were doing your research in that 10-year period?
So by the time that I started the Wine Bible, I had already been to every major wine region in the world because I'd been writing about wine for magazines. So I traveled a lot then. And then during the writing of the Wine Bible, traveled a lot and still do, because one of the things that makes the Wine Bible so different is, a lot of wine books are sort of just gray column after gray column, and they're really stripped down just to wine. But to me, what makes wine come alive is, culture and food and history and religion and art and all the stuff, the cultural stuff around it is what makes it enriching. And it's where wine really finds its place and its voice. So I put all that stuff back in. And when you're in a place, you have to feel that vibe. You have to figure out that culture. And if you can feel it, if you can really get there and listen and be close to it, then you can write about wine better. My editor at one point asked me when I was doing Wine Bible 2, she called me up and she said, "Where are you, by the way?" I said, "I'm in Argentina, in Mendoza, Argentina." And she said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, right at this moment, I'm about to take a tango lesson." And she said, "Karen, it's a book on wine." I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but I don't think you can understand Malbec until you understand the tango." And MJ, I really believe that, right? You got to get into the culture.
I don't know if I'm psychic, but I was like, she's gonna be a tango dancer or something. Not even mouth. It was. I just had that sense, and I begat the question when you said that you had traveled so much when you were a wine writer. What was your? Do you remember your first wine trip abroad?
Yes, I do. I do remember because I had just gotten published maybe once or twice. And I had gone to interview, it was around Christmas time, and the head of the Champagne News and Information Bureau, I had gone to interview him and wrote this wonderful piece on Champagne, my first piece. And it also turned out that he represented all of the sherry region of Spain. And so he told me that, and I said, "Oh, gosh, I would love to go to southern Spain. I'm sure sherry is wonderful." And he said, "Well, we're taking 50 of the top journalists in the United States to sherry, to Jerez on this trip in a couple of months. So send me, this was, I don't know, it wasn't email. Send me a note or a fax or something saying that you're interested." So I did, and a few months later, he called me up and he said, "Too bad, in importance, you're number 51 in the country." I'm like, "Oh,
It's like fourth place in the Olympics.
Yeah. So anyway, with one day to go, he called me back and he said, "Someone is canceled. Pack your bags." So I went to Sherry, to Jerez, and I got there and I hated the wine. I hated it. I came back, I thought, okay, I'm going to write a piece called "Death by Sherry." But you know what I realized is that because now I love sherry, I realized that some wines are rite of passage wines.
Mm.
They're, like sushi is a rite of passage food. You got to eat it a lot, and then one day the lights, it clicks. The light switch flips, and all of a sudden you get it, right? So I had to. In fact, even today, when my students tell me, oh, they don't like wine XYZ, I say it's because you haven't had enough of it yet.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And once you hit the baseball 50 times, then you can come back to me and either tell me you now get it or you don't like it. And then it's valid. But to just go and taste a wine a few times and say, nah, I don't think this is very good, it doesn't work that way.
No, you're right. And that's what we do. Like you said, I love the sushi analogy because, just children, like kids have never eaten something. They're like, I don't want it. I don't like it.
Yeah.
Right? Like literally, they could look at broccoli like, I don't want it. I don't like it.
Yeah.
They've never had it.
Exactly.
Right? So you had a wine twice, once. You don't know, the different in wine being so expansive, you got to keep trying it. Like you said, I love that. Like until you've done it like a certain number of times, then it becomes valid. But this might be a good time to just, on that note, just take a quick break, and we're going to come back with more Karen in just a few seconds. Okay, we're back. So, and I learned something to do because I like to use the excuse I'm from New Jersey. I think sometimes I can be verbally lazy, even though I have a podcast. So, Jerez, not Jerez. And I'm sure a lot of people are something.
Jerez, yes. Jerez, but Jerez.
Excuse me. So the book comes out. How was the book received upon release?
Oh, well, Wine Bible 3, the one that just came out a couple of weeks ago, I'm so grateful. I'm tempted to cry sometimes. The Wine Bible has actually changed a lot of people's career courses. It's turned them on to wine. People write me the most amazing letters and emails. So I'm grateful for that. I think it's because if you've read it, you know that it's written in a very different way. It was the first big American book, too. And, I love my British colleagues, but they sort of assume a lot of familiarity with European wine geography, which Americans didn't have.
Sure.
And I didn't assume that. And the other thing is that so many of the great British writers, they went to Oxford, Cambridge.
Yeah.
You can feel that in their writing, right? Well, I was a street kid. I did not go to Oxford or Cambridge. And the Wine Bible, I think when you read it, you feel like, if she could do it, I can do it.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, it's so true. So many differences. I'm also really intrigued about your second book. Tell everybody about your second book, Wine, Food, and Friends.
Yeah. So one of the things that has always surprised me is we probably all have seen some cooking shows, right? There are a lot of cooking shows on television. A lot of them are really fun, well done. Why isn't there a wine show? Why aren't there 10 wine shows on television?
I'm trying to turn this pot. This should be a wine show. This would be a very good wine show.
Yeah.
A lot of fun wine show.
It should be. So in 2004, I got together with two other people, one of whom was a professional fundraiser, and the other was the head of his own production company for PBS, for various shows on PBS. And we thought, we're a perfect threesome. We can do this together. I can do content and be on air. The head of production can get us onto PBS and does all the camera work, all the editing, and the money guy can raise the money. And in 2004, we did raise $1 million to do, which is what you need at a minimum, to do a 13-part series for PBS. So we raised that $1 million and did a show called Wine, Food, and Friends with Karen MacNeil. Was very successful. It, in fact, won an Emmy, a local Emmy, and it
Said every major award.
I forgot about that one. Well, anyway, yeah. But then, right, usually what happens with television is once you get in, once you do a television show and it's accepted, your next round of funding is easy.
Sure, it's supposed to be.
Yep. But we were now trying to raise money in 2008 and 2009 when all the financial markets crashed and nobody was in the mood to fund television. So I wound up doing a book as a result of that series called Wine, Food, and Friends, because I love wine and food. But that's where it had to stop.
What was the premise of the PBS series?
Well, the premise was that wine and food are, they're so closely linked. In fact, they are the same thing.
It's an agricultural product.
Yep.
So,
and all it is flavor. And
Yep.
what difference does it make if it's solid flavor or liquid flavor in your mouth? I just it drives me crazy when I hear people say, I remember the great cookbook writer Paula Wolfert used to say, "Oh, Karen, you choose the wine. I can't choose the wine. I'm a food person." And I would say, Paula, it's just liquid flavor versus solid flavor. You cannot. And in fact, I've asked sensory scientists this. Is it possible that you can be a food person and not a wine person? Like you really get and understand food flavor but not wine flavor? And sensory scientists will tell you no. It does not matter. Your brain doesn't care if it's liquid or solid. You're either into flavor or you're not.
Thank you. That settles an argument between me and my wife, because my wife is into food, really, and she loves to drink wine. But when if I'm stuck and I'm asking for a tasting note, she's like, I don't know, I just like to drink it. But now I have proof.
Yes.
Sensory science. So there, baby.
What's her name?
Pam.
Pam. Listen, you got to call me,
Yep.
friend. No more of this.
Yeah.
Help him with the damn tasting
I
notes.
know she makes these, and she'll just try recipe after recipe, and cardamom this and this obscure, go buy some sumac, and then it goes, we really need it for one recipe, all that stuff, And I'm like, I know, and she's like, nope, just it's got a kick. That's what she'll say. But also, I think in this book, I read somewhere that you did the food and wine pairings in everyday situations.
Yeah. But I have to admit that at the end, I think it's more important to match wine to mood than to food.
Ooh.
If you're in the, because I think being the wine and food pairing police is not a good thing. If you're in the mood to drink a Chardonnay and you're putting a steak on the grill, so be it. Okay.
I say that all the time. For the first rule of wine for me is drink whatever you want with whatever you want.
Yeah.
And I use that same example. If you want a big buttery Chardonnay and a ribeye, do it. Because it's like Coke or 7-Up. What's your burger? What difference? I mean, it's the flavors you want to have in your mouth.
Right.
You prompted something. I was in Walla Walla past weekend, and someone out there said this, and it was a preview of what you said. They said, I am a purveyor of flavor.
Yeah.
Is how they saw themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And I love what you said about that. Flavor's flavor, and that is just mind blown. Now, PBS. Tell people about PBS, because I think people hear public broadcasting system, and during the last election cycle, or when someone became president, they cut. People think PBS gets all this money for shows. How? And you mentioned you had a money person.
Yeah, no, PBS does not. It doesn't fund television. You have to come with your own sponsors and your own money.
And you have to do it to their spec, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You got to do it to their spec with your money.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a reason there aren't more television shows on wine. Not only are all the practical mechanics of that difficult, but then, you think of the great food shows, you're watching people bang pans around and flames are going and they're stirring the risotto and doing all this stuff I mean, you and I could probably swirl glasses well, but it's
Right.
not the same as
Right.
as all the pyrotechnics of food.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I still think there's room for a great show on wine. If I had enough money, I would go around the world doing interviewing the most amazing people in wine everywhere.
That's funny. Sometimes I mix the questions up, and one I took out, which I wish I hadn't now, because if I'm interviewing like a lot of people in wine, I'm like, well, if money were no object, what would you be doing? And most people are like, I'm a winemaker, I'm this. Not only, but I love your like. Okay, it's up to $2 billion now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You could do one hell of a wine show, Karen.
Yeah. The buy-in is a little bit big now. Yeah. Got to win that lottery,
Exactly.
man.
And I do say, because I'm reading Anthony Bourdain's book, not his book, a book about him, In the Weeds, by his producer. And what you just said, it crystallized something, because basically what you're doing, that's what he went around, maybe not drinking wine, but it was always that local alcohol beverage and talking with the local people, immersing in the culture, like you said, like why you were doing tango dancing. But you did this series, it didn't really have the sizzle. That's the thing. I didn't realize, like, every dish on there, they would go in the kitchen and have to shoot again. So that's where you get the clanking of the pans, the fire, the flambe.
Right.
So I love when things, like you said about drink that wine, like things. I'm like, yeah, no, this sounded like a great show. I was like, I'm so intrigued. Like, why did it sounded like basically what Bourdain did, but like didn't have. I mean, you could have savored. I mean, you can only savor so many champagne.
Yeah,
I'm trying,
exactly. Yeah.
You
I went and talked to Tony Bourdain's producers at one point. This was before he sadly committed suicide, because they were thinking about that. Those guys love wine too, and his production company 0.0
ZPZ.
Yeah, they're not only did Bourdain himself rise to incredible fame, but so did they. That was really their rocket to the top.
I didn't know the story, but I saw the Roadrunner movie. Yeah, they were just struggling,
right. Yeah, so they have looked for other, or at least when I went and talked to them, they were looking for other properties. But still, the other thing about wine is it's hard to get sponsors because it's alcohol. Right? Mm-hmm. So, the Italians have no problem with this. Olive oil people will sponsor you.
Right.
But American, like breakfast cereals, no.
Yeah.
They are not going to sponsor a wine show.
I was actually at dinner with a French winemaker from the Chateauneuf, female. And she blew me away. She said, you can't, even in France, they have to be careful advertising their alcohol. I was like, what? I was like, you guys have naked women on TV, but you can't advertise alcohol on TV.
Right.
So, but like you said, a lot of those PBS shows, it's all the olive oil. Well, it's a lot of like Lydia, but it's like.
Yeah, Lydia Bastianich, exactly.
Done a great job there. So, when did the Today Show happen? Was this before or after the PBS series?
Yeah, that was way before.
Okay.
Because, when I started, Bryant Gumbel was the host, so that's going back a ways. But Bryant, the lawyers would go crazy. They would be like, come on, it's 7 a.m. You have this woman on with wine? And he had such power. He would say, yes, we are. We're not gonna drink. The wine will be open. We'll swirl. But it's part of life.
I would think that demographic, for that show, are people who are going to drink wine with dinner. Like, why would, make their day better.
Yes.
Well, you got to go home and try that wine that Karen and Brian were talking about.
Yeah.
The lawyers ruin everything. So how long did you do that?
I did that for a number of years. And how many years? Probably 3 or 4 years. And then did PBS.
Okay.
In the early days of writing, when I was trying to still get published, I had this wonderful show on WMCA radio in New York called Living Well in New York, which was a radio call-in show. And it was the first time I got used to, doing other kinds of media, which I love. To this day, I love talking on radio and podcasts. So we were talking about this earlier. It's very similar, right?
Yeah. You have a great voice too. Good radio voice. So what was that like? So people like calling him like, "Hey Karen, my mother-in-law is coming to town, and I really want to impress her." Like, was it like that kind of thing, or?
Because I was young and I was scared, right? I didn't trust myself because it was a 4-hour show. So
That's a lot of talking.
That's a lot of talking. And I would script everything a little bit and or more than a little bit. And I would have guests, just like you're having me on as a guest. So the guests would come and I remember, and you would talk to engineers with your hands.
Mm-hmm.
You do hand signals to the engineers who were running the big board for you.
We used to have that here. Well, they just changed it, but there used to be a window so I could communicate.
Yeah.
So literally,
Hi, engineers
I
back
know,
there.
but if you've been to the other studio, you'd be like, wow, it is like you'd be like a radio station. It's totally like a recording studio. Exactly.
Yeah, it's like a recording studio. So one day, this was when I was early on, I had let my fourth guest go. And in those days, you were supposed to be talking until they got the AP, Associated Press wire, right at 12 noon. So I'm watching the secondhand big clock in the studio, and I'm saying, Karen MacNeil, WMCA Radio, living well in New York. Here's the AP wire, and now news from the Associated Press. And I hear the engineers talking in my earphones, and they say, can't get the AP wire, technical difficulties, keep going. I looked at them like a deer in the headlights. I'm like, keep going? I had nothing to say. I mean, nothing. I could not. I'd let my big mistake, do not ever let your last guest go until you're done, right? I had nobody to talk to and nothing to say. And so I hear the engineers, they're now yelling at me through my earphones. Talk.
Right. No radio. You got radio silence. You got dead air.
Dead air. Talk. Say anything. So anyway, I don't know how it came out of me, but I said, our last guest was talking about zinc in foods because it was a food and wine show. And do you realize that zinc is one of the best known aphrodisiacs? I don't know where that came out of, right? I don't even know if that's true. But the engineers are going like, yes, right?
That's
keep
so
going,
funny.
keep going. The board now lights up. People start calling in. Are aphrodisiacs really real? So anyway, I went for about 20 more minutes till we could get the AP wire. I walk out of the studio. I'm drenched in sweat because I was so nervous. Ted Koppel, very famous Ted Koppel, takes me aside, who was an old hand at radio, and he says, let me tell you what to do the next time that happens to you, because it happens to every radio person. Something terrible, and you've got dead air.
Mm-hmm.
And so radio was great in those days because you had all these great old-timers who would kind of take you under their wing and teach you what to do.
Yeah, I was thinking, it's so fascinating. I didn't know Ted Koppel did radio, but like we were talking about earlier with writing, it's not anything that people were making a whole lot of money. This is before the shock jocks and these major contracts, it was just like you earned a living.
Right.
So that's very interesting. So what, I was thinking about this on the way in on the train. I was like, okay, so it's called the Wine Bible. And now it's on its third edition. They only made I guess you had the Old Testament. The New Testament was like the updated edition of the Bible. What are some of the major additions? Let's see. What from the second to the third edition, because the first one was like over 20 years ago now. Right? So.
Yeah, the first one was in 2001, and then the second one was in 2015. There are a lot of new regions like Great Britain. If someone said to me 20 years ago that Great Britain would eventually be a wine region, I would think absolutely not.
Isn't that crazy?
And those sparkling wines are so delicious.
What I find is crazy is like just the synergy. Again, I was in Walla Walla, but I was talking to a winemaker, and he was I don't know if he was in London. He was in London. He was at Noble Rot.
Yeah.
Did you do any writing for them at all?
No, I
Okay,
don't.
okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was at Noble Rot, hanging out with some people at Noble Rot, and he's like, okay, I know you guys have some, stellar, sparkling. That's the word. He's like, blind me. So he blinded him on champagne.
Yeah.
And the British stuff. He liked the British stuff way more.
Yes.
But now it's like expensive. Like it's like Krug expensive type shit coming out of Britain now.
Yes. Well, in part, it's because the wine regions of southern England are only about 45 minutes south of London. So the real estate is outrageously expensive. But those sparkling wines are incredible. So there's that.
Mm-hmm.
China is much bigger as a wine producer now than it was ever before. There are old places that are new again, like
Armenia,
Croatia. All of the original places in Central Europe. But the part
Pet
that
Nats, natural. You got anything on natural wine in there?
yeah,
You should see your face.
I had to put. I did have to put some natural wine stuff in there. I mean, I feel like who wouldn't want the wine they drink to be as pure as possible and have. But most of the great wine in the world is that way.
That's thank you. That's kind of like my whole point. Is like it's so misleading. Most of the wine in the world is, and even the sulfur. I go through the sulfur debate. Yes, I understand it, but sulfur is a naturally occurring compound. So to add sulfur, how's that not make it natural?
Yeah.
On the periodic table, there's sulfur. It's right up there.
Exactly.
That's not unnatural.
That's exactly right.
And like you said, even at the highest levels, like even now in Bordeaux, a lot of the top show are moving to biodynamic. So like it's a very interesting. I don't know if debate's the right word. Conversation.
Yeah.
Because we don't debate anymore in this country on anything. People are either anti or for. So it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah. You know what else though is different that no one would necessarily ask you or even assume. So every new edition, you expect to have new information. But the other thing that changes is that hopefully you yourself got better, right? You yourself as a writer, as a researcher, as someone who can explain complicated issues in a really easily understandable way, you as a writer, as an author, hopefully got better. So I think I got a bit better.
I like that. So you do lots of things, though. Where did the idea to? Because you mentioned your students. How did the idea of the Rudd Center for Professional Wine Studies come to be and come into fruition?
One day in 1996, when the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America, moved and opened a campus in the Napa Valley, just down the street from where I live, the head of the CIA called me up because we knew each other from New York, and he said, "Do you want to teach a wine class?" And I said, "Sure. What would you like me to teach?" And he said, "I'm so busy getting the school open, which is primarily a culinary school, literally whatever you want." So I started this class called Mastering Wine, 8 hours a day for a week. It became, within a year, the highest grossing class at the CIA. So one day, the president of the big senior president of the CIA came out from New York, and he said, "What exactly are you teaching in that class? Because, it's really earning the CIA a lot of money." And I
hope you're getting a cut of that.
Yeah,
so.
I was.
Okay.
I was,
Okay. Good. Okay. Good.
I was learning to ask for the right cut. So, anyway, I tell him what the class involves, and he said, "Could we do more classes like this?" And I said, "I think you could do a whole school like this, a whole school within a school, but no one knows because you've never done it. I haven't either. Let me do a feasibility study." So the CIA paid me to do about a 3-month feasibility study, the answer to which was, this could be a really, a good thriving part of the Culinary Institute. So as it happens, I also found Leslie Rudd, the late Leslie Rudd, who was who owned, now his daughter owns Rudd Winery in Napa Valley. Wealthy man, interested in history, very interested in education, agreed to give the seed money. So now I had a money and a plan and a person myself to execute the plan. So, I like stuff like this. I like trying to see an opportunity where none existed before. There was nothing before the Wine Bible in the United States. I kind of created it in my head. There wasn't a wine program at the CIA. I created it in my head. My own business is very idiosyncratic because it just has grown as I have.
Yeah, so let's talk about your business. Let's go to tie in. Your style of wine education has been referred to as like TED Talk-esque. When did you actually start? How long ago did you start the wine consultancy that did win the award of best wine consultancy?
It maybe this is more true for women than men, but it took me, excuse me, a long time to say I was a wine consultant. And it took me years before I would say I'm a wine expert.
Mm-hmm.
If people asked me, what do you do? I wouldn't say I'm a wine expert. I would say, I know something about wine. Or even say I'm a wine writer. I would say I write about wine for years before I would say I'm a wine writer. So you can't, in my mind, it's not appropriate, or at least it wasn't for me, to just hang out a shingle one day and say I'm a wine consultant. I had to prove to myself, kind of the hardest person to prove anything to, that there was some gravitas behind that. So as in many other things, people would, in my case, people would see what I was doing and then say, hey, could you come and talk to this group of lawyers or talk to this group of doctors? So once that started to happen for me, I got very serious about watching how people present. And I started going to all kinds of presentations in New York, even about things I didn't know or even care about, watches. I just wanted to watch how people present, watch their rhythm, right? Watch when they told jokes, watch their ease, watch when they got quiet. Just develop, because I didn't have money to train myself in any of these fine skills. But you can learn that just by watching. I mean, back to Barack Obama, for God's sake, the man is brilliant at that. I sometimes, when he was running for president, I would say to my husband would be like, wow, did you hear what he just said about her? I'd be like, no, I'm just watching him, right? I'm watching him present, not even sometimes listening to the words. So I taught myself a lot by doing that, and I developed a style that was, I was able to be willing to be vulnerable, which is the most powerful thing you can be in front of other people.
I was gonna the questions, because I keep it light because I want to see we're having a conversation, but it's how your brain works. You already answered the question. I was gonna be like, I was gonna say, what advice would you give someone bringing in? And you're like, study, watch people. And nowadays we have YouTube, so you don't even have to.
Yeah. One of the things, and I know you've seen this too, that really upsets me is when, and this often happens, someone learns a lot about wine, and then what do they do? They want to show off, right? So they're just like, blah, 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 blah. Here's all the stuff I know about wine. Yeah. And I feel like one should turn the binoculars around. It's not what I know about wine. It's like what would be interesting for someone to hear? What can they receive? What natural questions do they probably have in their head? And so I'm always reminding myself, keep those binoculars turned around. Think about what a person would find funny or wonderful or fascinating. Not, you know, I'm so lucky I get to taste a whole lot of great wine. Too bad you're not there.
Right.
I hate that stuff.
Yeah. No, I often people ask, you know, I don't listen to other. I used to listen to podcasts, but now I'm producing one. I don't listen to them because I want to be fresh. But when I do try, every now and then, like there's this thing. Well, you should see what other people are doing. Every time, it's just what you said. It's like Malbec is a grape from the southwest of France, Cahors. But you know, I mean, and I'm like, that's not interesting. Like my whole point in doing this was like, who do I want to share wine with and get their story, right? And I think I don't know, but one of the most people are like, oh my God, she ran away from home. She's 14 and a half. Like that's what's going to resonate. But that's what's going to resonate with people, because how many people? Every time you open your mouth and share, you're amazed at how many people are like, that happened to me too, or this, you know what I mean? Like, you know, I grew up in it. So and I think it's just going to be so inspirational. Like, bam, look where you are now. But I also, your client list is pretty freaking impressive. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
like it's like you're not, you know, you're not doing bachelorette parties and bridal showers. Like you, like they have. Wait, this one blew me away. LMVH, like they sell all this stuff and they're bringing you into like.
Well, you know, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy,
Yeah.
I'm right, one of the great luxury wine giants of contemporary life, and they own, you know, they have more money than God in a way, and own a lot of many, sorry, they own
Been hanging out with me
many.
too long. Sorry.
Yeah, they own many great wineries, but I did a project for them that I really loved. They are so good, and they have so many fabulous wines that over time, the head of marketing realized that their salespeople they were having a harder and harder time, because they started to refer to all of their wines as iconic. Well, you can't, wait a minute, not every wine is iconic. And salespeople, you can really forgive them for this. You know, they just get into this zone where you just find yourself repeating the same stuff over and over again. And so the head of marketing of LVMH called me up and she said, we need fresh ideas. We need new words. We need someone who really does understand wine, but who comes at it from a different angle entirely. So I loved that. I had a great time.
Yeah. Do you think the fact that you don't have like why didn't you pursue an MW? Do you think that I think, or you're not an MS or an MW? Do you think is that what leads, and that you come more from the literary side is why you're able to connect more versus? Do you think that has to do with it at all, or how much do you think that has to do with it? That's a better question.
I kind of like not having a degree. I mean, I don't have a degree in anything. But both of the things that I love, writing and wine, you are judged by how well you can do them. You're not judged by, do you have a degree? I mean, maybe if you're an accountant or something, right, you do have to have a degree. But writing is evident, right? If you want to work for the New York Times, they don't say, show me your journalism degree. They say, here, write a paragraph on this glass of water.
Right.
And if you can do it, you can do it. And the same with wine. I think in Great Britain in the 50s, when the MW, Master of Wine, first began, it really did make a difference to your income. You really did, if you were in the trade. Mm-hmm. I'm not so sure it makes a difference to your income in the United States. Every now and then I think, oh, maybe I should go for an MW. And I actually was with Mary Mulligan in a group of the 15 people in New York in 1991 who were chosen to go into the MW program. But that was the same year I got the contract for the Wine Bible, and I thought, I better do this book because it'll be a good way to prepare in any case. But after the Wine Bible, I talked to some people at MW headquarters in London, and they said, you have your own MW. The Wine Bible is your MW. I mean, you could do it just for fun, but I don't know. I also love my own business, so yeah. It wouldn't make a difference, I don't think, to me.
Well, clearly, I mean, it's not gonna. You're not gonna get a big pay bump. You're
No.
good. No one's gonna be like, oh, we got to pay her more now.
Right. Yeah. But I completely respect both the MW and the MS. They are, they're both really hard. You really have to know your stuff. The one thing I might not like about it so much is it causes your thinking to be very linear and standardized. And I kind of like my head to be able to range around a little bit more.
No, yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I mean, I had, like I said, Mary, she was like, listen, I know you know enough about wine to sit here and have a conversation with me, and I have a master's of wine, so what more do you need? And yeah, like people, I see this in social media. It's like, oh, I have a WSET 1 and I have a 2 or a 3. I'm like, all right, that means ostensibly 24 wines that you knew you're going to get tested on. It doesn't mean you've gone out and like really explored, And so it is. It's an interesting balancing act.
You know what I want to jump in and say about that with you, because I bet you agree with me, which is there are now in the country a lot of people who know a lot about wine. What I think we lack are people who are good thinkers about wine. One thing is memorizing a whole bunch of stuff, and if you've got enough time and you're a reasonably intelligent person, you can memorize a whole bunch of stuff. But thinking about it well is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, because I agree. You're right. I worked in education for a little bit, nonprofit side. I never taught, but there's this thing when you realize that education has become a commodity. It's to get the next degree or whatever. It's not. You're not. It's become like I said. We as you can see, just like we have a lack of thinking going on right now, just generally, and the ability to formulate your own opinion and to share it and articulate. And so I definitely agree with that. But you're like, again, you are in addition to be this incredible wine expert, you have some business savvy. Talk about Wine Speed.
Yeah, Wine Speed. I love this. So this Wine Speed is my free digital newsletter. It comes out every Friday, comes to your inbox. You can just sign up for it by going to winespeed.com. And we have about 40,000 subscribers.
Wow.
Yeah, but it's free. But I want to keep it free because, and every, once a year in my office we debate, maybe we should charge a subscription, so on and so forth. But
you could do another level. I mean,
yeah, I know.
I mean, ostensibly, listen, as long as you keep it free, listen, you got 40,000 people. You're leaving a lot of money on the table. I said it, but like, if you just offered something to there's people who want to pay more. They just are.
Yeah.
Why don't you serve? I mean, there's nothing wrong. I mean, keep it free. Don't ever put it behind. But like, there's people who want it.
Yeah, we might, but for now, okay, all your listeners should jump in now.
I was going to say, right.
At least right now, it's free.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's your little dose of wine every week. And it's not like a standard newsletter. It's super graphic, and you can read it in as much time as it takes to open a bottle of wine. You can read the whole thing. And every week we do a wine quiz. And there are like people all over the country who will text me or write me like, I can't believe I missed the wine quiz this week. It's so great. It has a life of its own. And it's kind of opposite to the Wine Bible. But unlike a lot of blogs, we spend in my office a lot of time on, too much time probably, making sure wine speed is right, and we fact check it and we bring to it.
Well, thank you for bringing some integrity to this thing called the internet.
Yeah.
That's incredible. You do so many things. So talk about the pandemic, because you had to pivot like everyone did. I'm sure you were out on the road doing talks and events several months out of the year probably. So what did you do once we went into kind of like lockdown?
I quickly kind of dusted off the old television and radio skills and started doing all of, because my business went from having whatever we had. I don't know. It wasn't an enormous amount, but that was, remember, it was about April and March when
Really
yeah,
hit.
2020 when it really hit. And I went from having X many thousands of dollars on the books for events that I was about to do to zero, absolutely no money coming in with employees to pay. So we were successfully able to start doing videos, which I loved. And I realized that, maybe it's hard to do TV, but you can do videos with wine very successfully. And a lot of our clients, big law firms and insurance firms and big companies like that, were also desperate to keep their people together somehow. And so we would send wine out to 25 lawyers who belonged to law firm X, and with a video invite, and people would jump on, and now video is a big part of our business. And for people who are wine lovers, all of a sudden it was great. They could jump on. We do a lot of live virtual tastings called Taste with Karen, or Sip with Karen rather, and it's sort of free education. Jump on, listen for 45 minutes, get involved, buy the wine too. It's great. It's been fabulous, I think, not just for my company, but for people who have wanted to learn about wine. You don't have to go anywhere. Just jump on your computer, jump on Zoom. That's fabulous.
Yeah. Do you have a wine partner? Like Kevin Zraly did the same. He uses wine.com. Like, I think it gave people access to people whose books they had read. And, it gave them access to people like you. Yeah,
well, Kevin is my old friend, and we used to date a long, long time ago. I think he took me on the Staten Island ferry on our first date. I always remind him of that, big spender there. But he did bring a bottle of Dom Perignon, which we drank without glasses. Sitting on the Staten Island ferry.
Okay,
so
that's kind of a dope. Okay. That's kind of a dope date. I'm sorry.
yeah, we were young.
Exactly.
But I'm like, when Kevin made the deal with wine.com, I thought, I could just, you were right there ahead of me. Yeah, Kevin is great though, and he's a fantastic teacher.
Yeah, I think we really wouldn't have wine education in America without him, and he is an amazing teacher, and I think it's But again, you have, I tell people, I'm like, Kevin Zraly doesn't have any letters behind his name. Like it was on the job, and you two are some of the most influential wine writers. His book and your book are like on just about every master wine and master somm shelf anyway, particularly if they're from the States, you know what I mean? Yeah,
he's so great. And in fact, on the cover of Wine Bible 3, the third edition, is a quote.
Yeah,
is a quote from Kevin.
Yeah.
So he's my dear friend and just a brilliant man.
And so you also kind of have, is it a podcast? But it's talks with Karen. How do you categorize your wine talks with Karen? Yeah,
they're, we call them everyone calls them, I guess, live virtual tastings. Okay. And we...
But you just did something like with Blaine, Champagne Week. It's Champagne Week.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, those are our live virtual tastings
Okay, it's
too.
still live. Okay.
Yep. And we
Wow.
interview people who are either other people in the industry or sometimes wine producers, and we have we're getting pretty good at we have a teleprompter in our office now and a studio. Maybe not as I want all the listeners to know that your studio is more spiffy
This
than
is
mine.
not my studio. I rent this space, just for the record.
Well, it's a fabulous
But I mean,
studio.
yeah, this is actually is. I mean, I think a lot of people. It's New York, so some big people actually do record out here.
Yeah.
Just not just bigger people. I can't even think of the word. Just not your average, just run of the mill podcasters come here as well. Let's put it that way.
Well, look at you.
Yeah.
I mean, right?
Thank you.
But anyway, these live virtual tastings, you can, if you go on Wine Speed, every week we tell you
Okay.
what's coming and how to jump on. And it's as easy as there. We provide a link, you register, and you join in.
So you live in the Napa Valley. How long have you lived in the Napa Valley?
Since the mid 1990s. And I moved there from New York. You could argue maybe it wasn't the smartest move in one way, because I gave up all those fabulous tastings that you get to go to, for example, that are here.
I'm thinking about moving to wine country, though, because for what I do interviews, I mean, I have to wait for people to come through New York City.
Yeah. Yeah, it's different now. You can live in wine country. And I just believed that somehow living closer to grapevines would make me better at what I do, and just kind of through osmosis. And it has. I love living in wine country.
So that begs the question: how come you never have you ever made a wine?
No.
Okay. Why haven't you made a wine? Because I would imagine you've been there since midnight. You have all these friends, like the Ruds. They would throw you some tonnage. You could make some really, I'm sure you could get your hands on some nice fruit, and make something small.
Yeah. I don't know why I have never. I've worked a harvest, but I don't. I love the feeling of being broad, right? Having this global knowledge, and to begin to see connections between why certain things are done in certain places. Whereas when you're a winemaker, you're going deep, right? You've got your one terroir, and you're knowing that as deeply and personally as you can. So I guess I've always wanted to have the world view.
Okay. All right. Now there's something that's part of your offer, right? You do make a wine that next level, and Karen's got this 2-pack wine.
All right. You're giving me a good idea here.
Just a couple more questions. I'm gonna let you go soon. I would love to talk some more, but I'm not gonna. You got places to go, people to see. We're going to play a game right now, and it's called FMK, and the F stands for a word that rhymes with tuck. Marry and kill. I'm gonna give you 3 grapes, and you get to tuck one, you get to marry one, and you have to kill one off.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Okay.
You ready? Nebbiolo, Pinot Noir, Tempranillo. What grape do you fuck? What grape do you marry? What kill? What do you got? You got Pinot Noir, Tempranillo, and Nebbiolo.
All right. Oh man, this is hard. I'm going to marry Nebbiolo because it reveals itself over a long period of time. So that's going to be a nice long marriage.
I like that.
I'm going to knock off Tempranillo. I'm so sorry, Tempranillo in Spain. But I love you, but you've got to go. And Pinot Noir, yeah, Pinot Noir. I'm going to tuck into bed with because thank you for that. Yeah, it's just it's just so sexy, Pinot Noir.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. What are you most excited about for the future?
I'm really excited that the wine industry and we wine consumers are waking up about climate chaos. In Napa Valley, I have had to evacuate 3 times in the last 5 years. It's no longer climate change, which sounds like change, isn't that good? We all love change. It's climate chaos. The Union of Concerned Scientists a couple of years ago gave the wine industry 28 years before certain grapes begin to go extinct. It's, scientists refer to wine grapes as a so-called indicator crop, meaning that they're one of the first crops to go because grapes and vines are so dependent on water and just a certain amount of sun and not too much humidity, all of that. So scientists are watching wine grapes very closely because right behind them are big crops like soybeans and corn. These are the crops on which human life depends. It's so we there's no more. We're out of time. We are way out of time, and I'm excited that people are beginning to understand that.
Okay, and just one last question, because you've been drinking wine since you're 14 and a half, 15. But what if there is? Was there a bottle of wine that really started it all when you had that bottle of wine? You were just like, oh, I like that light bulb moment for you.
Yeah, well, my 89-cent Bulgarian Reds I think of very fondly. I remember being incredibly startled by a Gigal Côte Rôtie, Blonde et Brune. It's this wine called the Blonde and the Brunette. And it's from a part of the Northern Rhone, a tiny part called Côte Rôtie. And the wines there are just outrageous. I mean, you just put it in your mouth and you cannot believe. I call these wines primal scream, right? They're just screaming with spice and blood and guts and tar, and they're so corrupt and outrageous. You're just
like that corrupt.
Wow, like what is this? And that was my first introduction to the idea that wine could drink you. I mean, I really felt like I was not drinking this wine. It was drinking me. It was in charge. And a whole new world of outrageousness opened for me.
That's a great way to end. Karen, thank you so much for coming in. This has been really fun. Tell people where they can find you, how they can be a part of what you're doing.
Yes, easy. KarenMacNeil.com. You can buy a signed copy of the Wine Bible there, or for a list of everything we're doing all the time and all the changes that happen, winespeed.com. Get your daily, or not daily, but weekly dose of fun wine information and see all the stuff we're up to. And join in. Yeah,
guys, make sure, because you heard me pitching her on. She said it's going to be free, but you should. I'm going to go home and sign up for that list myself. Actually, I'm going to do it on the train on my phone. For all you listeners out there, excuse me. Travel. Don't forget to check out the show notes for each episode. That's where you're going to find info on where we're going to put Karen's info on her website. You can see it right there. We'll put her social media handles and links to some of the cool stuff we discussed. Until the next time, cheers to you mavericks, philosophers, deep thinkers, and wine drinkers. It's MJ. Peace.